got any yet, but I'll start with a few questions. So I think that was really interesting. I certainly think it explains behaviors that we see with our children and with our colleagues. They're immediately either turned off or turned on to things that they're looking at on a device.
Right.
We can see that much more a small device than a big device. So I guess the question's, have you started to share this information? Because it's very similar to some of the work that we've seen from some of the platform companies, from Facebook and YouTube. Is there a consensus in the industry that this needs to start being used more kind of formally, or is that the start of the process now that you guys are going to be working on?
Well, it is the start of the process. I mean, this is very fresh. Yeah, this is very fresh. I mean, we just released that a month ago. So we're really kind of at, you are probably the first people to see this. So we have some initial reactions, both from marketers and from publishers. I mean, the MMA, we are a marketer-led group. So we have shared that with our board of directors, who are like major CMOs and all of those organizations, and we have been sharing that with our members. I think it is a little bit of a wake-up call in terms of like, are we thinking this the right way? Have we been thinking this the right way, or should we kind of be shifting our attention instead of like buying people's time into earning their attention more? And if you think about it in that way, I mean, we always say, everybody says that creative is important, but then we all know that it's usually kind of repurposed from some other media when it comes to one screen from the other. So I think that it kind of behooves us to think more about creative. And I think, again, it's the start of the process. We don't have all the answers, but the reception so far is like, yeah, interesting. We should be thinking about that.
Yeah, and I think it's good. The transparency piece is really good. Scott, do you want to talk a bit more about how the area for thinking about that?
Sure. I call it just radical transparency. You saw the 3 steps. It's a heavy lift, particularly when you've got multiple partners. I think there were 7 companies involved in the MMA study. So that's a lot of legal departments to approve, letting us host the data. It's a lot of bother. But I think particularly when there's so much skepticism in the world and a tendency to be relativistic about empirical findings and doubt those, I think it's extremely useful to have a third party look in on it and say, what they think is going on. And we actually made them modify at least some element, or suggested, we didn't make them, but we suggested some modifications early on that would have tightened up the design.
Yeah. Are the ads up on accessible? The actual content?
No, the ads, that's part of the legal thing in terms of like, because the ads weren't the ads of the participating companies. There's ads, and it's hard for me to kind of show some ads that didn't work and to say, well, these are ads that didn't work without getting someone's permission about that. So.
Yeah, that's always hard. I think, but that helps us, certainly on the agency side, understand why they're not working. So I wonder if there's a process, not necessarily with the content you've already measured, but a going forward process that allows us to easily bring.
Yeah, and I think this is where phase 2 will actually be more focused on that. So we're going to be testing different types of narratives. We're going to kind of get more deeper into, the length of 6 versus 15 and all those things. And then we're going to kind of focus on bringing up best practices that are validated by science.
It is very consonant with work that the ARF did a couple of years ago that did measure effectiveness. It wasn't a cognition study. It was about what led to ads succeeding. And one of the sharpest findings of it is that if you didn't have branding really early in a video loop, chances are your ad was not going to be effective. And that's consistent with a view that the attention, the sort of payoff for attention is not linear. It starts really early and levels off after that.
Right.
And I think, again, we've seen things from Facebook and YouTube that support that in their best practice as well, so that's good. So we're starting to get some questions. I'm going to read some of these out now. The first one, how do you define low-performing ads in the study? So was it cognition?
So no, we actually selected the ads from a pool of of ads that had been tested, and we had brand lift results, and so we took the top quartile and the bottom quartile for like high performance and low performance when it comes to like specific brand KPIs. So it was from the same pool of ads and universe of ads that we had comparable data for.
Okay, yeah, that's good. Is it reasonable to ask advertisers to pay for video ads that are exposed for less than a second? What do you think about that?
Well, I think I have a good answer for that, but I think it's going to take a while. So here's a short version of that. We don't know yet, but I think this is an area where you see that there is value there, and there could be value in certain occasions where, for instance, you've seen the ad, like as you think about the frequency, you've seen the ad a couple of times, do you really need to play the whole thing, or can someone kind of play the whole thing in their mind just by seeing the first couple of seconds or the first second? Now, the problem is that we don't have the media buying tools right now to kind of test and learn for that. You can either buy a viewable impression or a non-viewable. I mean, you won't buy a non-viewable impression, but you cannot go and buy a 1 second viewable, right? And if you could do that, you could actually start putting this data into your attribution models and all that, and start kind of seeing, is there a value, and what is the proper price for that? Because I guarantee you that the price would be much lower, obviously, from the viewable impression. It would have to be lower. If there's value there, you just have to be able to measure it and capture it.
Right. I would probably say in response to that we don't know yet. And part of that is just because this is one study. It is in lab. It's huge for a neuroscience study, 900 respondents. I don't know of any other neuroscience study with that large of a sample. But it's still, under lab conditions where one can argue that attention is cued by the mere fact of being in lab. So I'd want to actually confirm it with other observations in field and other things that would give me more confidence. But there may be some value in these very short exposures.
Right.
Considerably less. It's really a question then of, how much, and also this question of when you start the clock.
Right. Another one. We know, thanks to your work, that the 1 second is key. Do you have any information behind those mechanisms? And so I think maybe that's looking at the why. Is it working like that? And I think building on what you said about the branding impact at the beginning, perhaps that's a start of the understanding of why and the building of some kind of best practice. Maybe the ARF could look to consolidate some of that?
Yeah, sorry.
I was just going to say, we sometimes know, and it wasn't measured directly here, that when ads are familiar already and people can recognize them, then you're going to get a faster response than if they're completely unfamiliar. Yeah.
No, I just want to say, obviously, we didn't have time to cover it, but we have started building a framework that we call the first-second strategy, and it does have a summary of some of those elements that we think, based on previous research, that play a role, and they have to do with like elements of color, and contrast and complexity of an image. I mean, things that have to do with the visual salience, but also things that have to do with the emotional salience. Are you showing, a dog or people in the first frame of an ad, or something else? I mean, all of those different things play a role, especially in that very high velocity kind of environment. And we do know from previous research that some of those have been validated, and we know that specific colors mean specific things. And if you're just scrolling very fast, everything is a blur, so you just see a color, and that color creates an emotion at that point. So we do have some information about that, and you can check it out into our website. We're building that framework. But again, that's part of phase 2.
Phase 2. Okay, I think time's up now, so we'll thank our speakers from this morning, and we'll move on to the next session. Thank you.
Thank you.